this video is going to highlight 5 of my main tips for absolute beginners, or maybe some of you who have been practicing for a little longer but are in the early stages of navigating maybe an open level vinyasa class and some of the trickier parts of those classes. So that might apply to those of you who are taking class in a studio or maybe online. These are going to be really good tips to take with you into any of those settings. So the first thing that I often hear from people who are taking yoga class for the first time is that they really want clear communication from their instructor about how to breathe in the class. And while we all seem to be aware to some extent that the yoga practice is really integrated with the breath, I think sometimes we get too caught up on that in the early stages. Give yourself the permission not to worry about it too much when you're first starting your practice. If your teacher is giving you a lot of cueing, especially around specific movement, you can just choose to leave that behind. If they're saying inhale on up dog, exhale as you step forward, inhale halfway lift, exhale soften, that's great. But it might just be leading you down a path of overanalyzing. At this point, worry about the asana, worry about staying in tune with your breath. Number one, your breath to be constricted, but you don't need to make it the sole focus of your practice at this point. I will offer some tips about when is a good time to worry about your breath. So often I find that one of the easiest times to worry or to start to integrate your breath into your practice are repetitive movements. So here's an example. So we can say we're doing a cat-cow all together. We're setting up, shoulders, elbows, wrists stack, and your hips are over your knees. And then if you press down with your hands moving into your cat pose, you could exhale. And then inhale as you draw your chest forward. Exhale. And inhale. And if you wanted to play with reversing that, you could inhale as you draw your belly up. And then exhale. Good. And so what you'll see is it doesn't necessarily really matter whether you inhale or exhale on any given pose. The caveat with that is, I think that there are some poses that are sort of generally agreed upon to be, and certain movements that tend to be a little bit easier when you exhale or inhale at a certain count. This just seems to be the common theme if you take a yoga class. Example of this might be hopping forward from down dog. You're in your down dog, and then the teacher might say something like, bend your knees, and at the bottom of your exhale, you can hop to the top of the mat. And while you absolutely could inhale as you step to the top of the mat, and you could absolutely jump on the exhale, it is really common for you to hear the cue. Bottom of the exhale, step in or hop to the top of the mat. Why? There's a million reasons why that could be. But for the purposes of your early yoga practice, don't get so caught up in those details. So the next thing that I often hear, and I get this a lot in some of my public yoga classes, is that people have a hard time stepping forward from down dog and also stepping back on the mat. And so all these transitions, especially in an open level vinyasa class, are going to happen really fast, and they're often not going to be explained. And while there are a lot of different variations, modifications, and options that you can take that utilize a lot of props, oftentimes, I hear it over and over again, in your open level vinyasa class, they just aren't available for whatever reason. So this is my favorite option for people who are struggling with stepping forward from down dog. And so that will look like this. Often you'll be in your down dog, and your instructor will say something like, inhale, lift the back leg up, exhale, cut the right knee towards your nose, and step your right foot alongside your right thumb. And as you can see, this is a really challenging position for people to be in. To step your foot alongside your thumb is not easy. There's a lot of things that have to happen in order for you to step that leg forward. So not only do you have to be able to protract your shoulders and puff up your upper back and make space for that leg to come through. You also have to be able to bend your knee deeply into your chest. You have to be able to bend your knee deeply and draw the heel towards your buttocks. There's just a lot that has to happen so that you don't drag the foot or get stuck in that transition. So a common option is for an instructor to tell you to step around, to abduct the leg and step it forward. And while I like this, it still requires a lot of flexion there. And I tend to find also people are really hesitant to do this, especially in class with a group of people, because the leg could swipe through your neighbor. So this is my favorite option, and I think this option builds up the mechanics so that you get a little more familiar with this transition, and eventually you might take a slightly bigger step forward. So rather than taking that leg out to the side, my suggestion for you is from your down dog, inhale, you might reach the leg up, exhale, you cut the knee forward as far as you can go. So you're pushing your boundaries, you're pressing down with your hands, you're seeing where your end range is here. Then you set the foot down. Okay, so I set about halfway down the mat. You lower the back knee down momentarily. You adjust the foot. You can do that like that, or you can actually use your hands and twist your chest to get it out of the way. Then come up onto the back toe. And I promise you, I think people are very concerned about falling behind the group. Don't worry, that took me all of 3 seconds. Leg up, step forward, back knee down, adjust, and lift the back knee up. That's all it takes. So the next thing I see with absolute beginners is that often we feel inclined to follow the instructions that we're given very literally. So the teacher will say something like, step your leg forward, place your hands down, and then you'll come up into a high lunge, a warrior pose, any of the standing postures. And what will happen is we'll stand up and we'll feel super wobbly. And it's gonna be really hard to balance in those postures. And so my recommendation for you is to widen your legs. So often people will think that they have to be on a tightrope, one foot directly in front of the other, or even just hips width apart. And for most of us, that's not a very wide base. That's a pretty narrow stance. And so my suggestion is to take your feet a little bit wider in all of your standing postures. So that might be walking 1 foot 2 to 3 inches in one direction or the other. But do that while you're in a position that's lower to the ground. So set yourself up before you stand up. Because once you stand up, it's gonna be harder to adjust your legs. Things are already getting wobbly. So an example of that would be, again, perhaps you're in your down dog and you step forward and your teacher is setting you up to head up in some high lunge or similar posture. Before you go up, walk your front foot 2 to 3 inches to the side, or walk your back foot 2 to 3 inches to the side. It takes half a breath. You'll be fine. You'll keep up with the group. Then you can use your hands and come up. I'm set up in a really good place where I have no concerns about falling off my mat. Okay, so the next big tip I have for you, take a knees down chaturanga. I could go on for hours about chaturanga, and there's a lot that could be said about what needs to happen to build strength and the skill to do chaturanga with the legs extended. But what I find, unfortunately, for a lot of beginners is that they're not offered this option early on in their practice, and so they don't have a tool to help them build strength for that other, or for the chaturanga with their legs extended. What's often given to beginners as an option for chaturanga is knees, chest, chin, and I'm very, very poor at demonstrating knees, chest, chin, just simply because I don't practice it. But it's something like you're in your plank, you lower your knees down, you lower your chest down, and then you lower your chin, and then you shoot through into your variation of your prone back bend, whether that's upward dog or low cobra. The problem for me with knees, chest, chin is really that it's just very dissimilar to what the chaturanga looks like. For those of you who have not seen chaturanga, it usually looks something like this. You're in your plank, You hug the elbows in, you gaze forward, and you lower down. And then you either lower it all the way down to the ground, or you come forward into some version of an upward facing dog. Again, it's usually a back bend. And it's often treated as a linking step, and it's also often not explained in a vinyasa level class. So my option for people who are trying to build the skill to do chaturanga over time is to place your knees down, and I'll show you what that looks like. So you're in your plank and your teacher calls out, okay, it's time for chaturanga. Lower your knees down. Shift your, you can untuck your toes. I find that usually makes more sense for people. Shift your hips forward so you have a line from the crown of your head down to your knees. And then you're gonna take the exact same option as everyone else. And you can again lower part of the way down, and then that actually really sets you up in a decent position to sort of pull your chest through and move into your upward facing dog, or to go all the way or part way down to the mat. The most challenging part for people is gonna be that last 2 inches when you're going all the way down to the mat. So what I usually offer is this. Rather than just skipping this entirely, set yourself up, again, knees down, gaze forward. You're gonna go about as low as you can. Pause for a moment, feel the shake, then take forearm, hips down to the mat. Behold, you're here with everyone else. Again, it doesn't take that much longer. Just take the steps and you'll build up to where your best chaturanga is gonna be. Okay, so my last big tip for beginners has to do with Shavasana, or your final rest in whatever class you're taking. It's really weird. Shavasana is super weird. If you've never been in a yoga class before, it is really, really strange after you've done what feels like a workout usually, for everybody to stop. Everybody lays down, everybody seemingly goes to sleep for 5 minutes. Very strange. That's okay. There are a lot of reasons why Shavasana on your back, as it's typically taught with the arms and legs extended, might not be a great idea for you. Know that your teacher understands that. Most yoga teachers are gonna be really empathetic, and they don't actually expect you to lay on your back flat for 5 minutes or however long your Shavasana is instructed for. However, not every yoga teacher is going to give you the option to do something different verbally. They may not announce that in class. Here are some really easy things that you can do if Shavasana is just not right for you for any reason. I love finding a nearby wall and just leaning against the wall. So people find it super grounding. They're up against the wall. It also lets you see the entire area of the room. Know also that nobody expects your eyes to be closed if that's not right for you. You're welcome to keep your eyes open. Really, really common to just gaze 2 feet in front of you on the ground, or to look up at the ceiling softly. Seated meditation is great. That's always an option in my class. Another option that's really great, some people just don't feel very comfortable with their arms and legs extended on the back. Might not feel great in your low back. I get it. Take constructive rest. That looks like this. You can separate your feet, usually about mouth width distance apart is pretty good. And then you can just place your arms on your belly or reach them off to the side, but you allow your knees to fall in together to support one another. The other thing I'll say about this is that you're not married to your position for the entire duration of the class. I always say something before I start a Shavasana with a large group of people. I'll say, just know that we'll be here for a couple of minutes. I'm gonna be here to keep track of the time for you, and I'll let you know when it's time to come out. And if at any point you need to adjust your position for any reason, go ahead and do so, and then return your attention back to your breath or whatever it is that you're using to help ground your Shavasana, to help ground your attention. And that's really true. I think people are afraid to move. It's okay to move. It's okay to make little adjustments. It's okay to itch your nose. It's okay to sneeze. No one's gonna kick you out of the yoga class. Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. Please shoot me your questions. I love questions, I especially love beginner questions. And wherever you are in your yoga practice, whether you're an absolute beginner or a more experienced practitioner, I hope that some of these tips will help you get a little bit more permission to take your practice at your own pace, as well as just to build a more fulfilling, fruitful class over time. Again, my name is Kathleen Bostleman. Thank you so much for joining me.